One reason that fans are so drawn to BoJack Horseman, the show and character, boils down to the relationships. Much of the story is BoJack struggling with his own problematic behaviors. Never is that more clear than in his interactions with others. Hey guys, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and this is BoJack Horseman Relationships, Healthy to Toxic. Alright, time for the rules. Usually for these videos we rank couples, but this time we'll only be looking at BoJack and his relationships. This will include his ties to his friends, family, and some romantic partners. We'll be starting with the healthiest relationships before moving down into the flawed and toxic. And keep in mind that healthy is relative in this context. Winning the gold medal of healthy relationship to BoJack is Mr. Peanut Butter. This is as good as it gets, and it's still far from perfect. Their friendship hinges on Mr. Peanut Butter's lack of self-awareness, and BoJack doesn't even like him for majority of the series. It's a one-sided friendship for a long time, which isn't healthy. But it evolves into something more, by Mr. Peanut Butter sticking around through the ups and downs. Those downs inspire some of BoJack's most genuine moments. A great example is when BoJack goes on Mr. Peanut Butter's TV show, Hollywood Stars. What do they know? Do they know things? Let's find out. Mr. Peanut Butter confronts BoJack about kissing his wife, and BoJack apologized. This is something he has trouble doing, but here, he finally acknowledges that he was in the wrong. In turn, he reevaluates how he sees his friend. Though Mr. Peanut Butter may have forced his way into BoJack's life, it becomes a meaningful friendship in earnest. Having a source of positivity in his life undoubtedly makes BoJack a better person and gives him a support system. This aspect of their relationship is shown when BoJack is released from prison on furlough, and Mr. Peanut Butter is there to make sure he has everything he needs. The final aspect we love is that Mr. Peanut Butter is self-involved. While that can be a negative in some of Mr. Peanut Butter's other relationships, it almost serves as a buoy in this context. Other people in BoJack's life often get sucked into his bad habits, but Mr. Peanut Butter always has something else going on that can keep him afloat. Taking the silver medal is Diane. We probably don't have to talk about why their relationship is toxic at certain points. In the early seasons, BoJack thinks he's in love with his ghostwriter and tries to win her affection away from Mr. Peanut Butter. She correctly points out that this is juvenile and doesn't want to change the dynamic of their friendship. There are also multiple times where we see how Diane and BoJack can bring out the worst in one another. When she comes home early from her trip and doesn't have the courage to face her husband, she stays with BoJack and encourages him to hide from his problems as well. They drink all day and rewatch episodes of Horsing Around.
Hey Diane, you're still here. And BoJack is here.
When they get trapped in a collapsed fundraiser event, they avoid the realities of their situation in a similar fashion. But they're too similar. Though Diane is more self-aware and tries to work through her issues, they have the same vices and the same instinct to play games, rather than address their feelings directly. When Diane disapproves of something he's done, she avoids confrontation. This leaves BoJack to fix a problem he doesn't know they have, or make amends for something he doesn't understand has had a negative impact on Diane. He should do those things, but Diane should let him know when he's wrong. At the end of the series, Diane works up the nerve to tell him how his actions have affected her. Even before that, she sets healthy boundaries and holds firm in her moral positions. The other people still close to him at that point coddle him and shield him from the consequences of what he's done. But Diane trusts him to take responsibility when he should. Even through their pain and disagreements, she's there to get him help whenever he needs it, taking him to rehab or calling back and making sure he's okay. We think it's one of the reasons why she's so good for BoJack. Despite some of her brief bouts with her own depression, we think he's good for her as well. Taking the bronze medal is, surprisingly, Herb Kazaz. Herb was BoJack's best friend back in the 90s when they worked on a very famous TV show. Since things didn't end well, most of their interactions we see come from flashbacks set in that time period. Until things went horribly wrong, we think BoJack's relationship to Herb was undoubtedly one of the healthiest in his life. They believed in each other and lifted each other up through the rocky world of show business. We know that it was easier for BoJack to maintain healthy relationships at this time in the story because it was before many of his self-destructive habits surfaced. Though they eventually have a falling out and don't speak until BoJack goes to make amends, we still have to appreciate the friendship the two of them had. We also have to respect Herb's commitment to his own feelings when he ends up not accepting BoJack's apology.
Yeah, and I do not forgive you.
Next is Hollyhock. Hollyhock turned out to be great for BoJack. Their relationship got off to a rocky start because they couldn't stop lying.
Stop lying to me.
Hollyhock was secretly trying to prove that BoJack was her father, then BoJack tricked her into staying with him by pretending to have bleeds on her mother. There were a few other bumps along the way. Again, with BoJack, no relationship is ever perfect. He eventually learns to accept Hollyhock as a member of his family. Even though she's not his daughter but his half-sister, she brings out a more paternal side than we're used to seeing. It's nice to see him care for and feel protective of someone. Hollyhock contributes to this as well. She faces a lot of the same struggles as her older half-brother, but she makes an effort to communicate with him. She isn't afraid to call him out when she feels he's done something wrong or is taking something too far. Rounding out the tier is Todd Chavez. Like with Hollyhock, we think this relationship works because Todd evolves and learns to set boundaries. When we're introduced to Todd, he isn't in the mindset or position to call out BoJack on much of anything, especially since he's living on BoJack's couch rent-free. There was a long period where BoJack's relationship to Todd was used to show his growth. The perfect example of this phase is Todd's rock opera. BoJack thinks it's stupid, but then learns to care about Todd's projects and helps him evolve into something that will make him successful. That pride turns into fear when BoJack realizes he doesn't want Todd to be able to leave him. This is toxic on BoJack's part, but it was the first admission that BoJack likes having someone around. The show continues this forward progression by eventually letting Todd discover what happened and confront BoJack. There are other cycles of this between them that culminated in Todd leaving the apartment and moving on. Todd learning to stand up for himself and taking the space he needs was a big part of his progression. It also meant that by the finale, he was able to be there for BoJack in the role of friend and equal that he'd always sought. We're moving on to relationships that, while not completely toxic, still had their fair share of red flags. This is the gray area. First is Princess Caroline. In the finale, she and BoJack have gotten into a great place. Princess Caroline has moved on, found love, and finally acknowledged that she isn't able to work as his agent without getting lost in his life. This moment may be a great sign of growth for them, but it doesn't undo all the damage. BoJack uses Princess Caroline for years to make him feel better about himself. Their on-again, off-again relationship was damaging for Princess Caroline.
Oh my god, we just broke up.
She continued to allow it, however, because of her own issues with self-esteem and compulsion to problem solve. This is something she's able to overcome and is a big part of her character arc. What we think is most toxic from that point forward is how she continues to enable him and help him evade consequences. This is prevalent in the final season. She's so supportive of the new, sober BoJack that she often oversteps when trying to shield him from his own past actions. Following her is Wanda. This is really frustrating because it had the potential to be the healthiest of BoJack's relationships, but it fell short. BoJack becomes romantically involved with Wanda, an owl who has been in a coma since the 80s. She doesn't know he's famous. She didn't watch horsing around. As a result, BoJack feels like he can be himself around her. What's more is that being himself allows him to work on some of his issues. He admits to her that he's not perfect, but when he's with her, he feels like he wants to be better. It was progress. Unfortunately, he abandons this arc for old habits. He's placed too much pressure on himself to improve, and too much pressure on the relationship to motivate him on that journey. When he begins to sink into unhealthy patterns and Wanda tries to help him, he lashes out at her. Their dynamic had promise, but was often filled with games and toxicity. At the end of the day, BoJack chose to abandon his self-improvement and pushed Wanda away. Next is another of his exes, Anna Spanakopita. Like most of his romantic pairings, there were sweet and genuine moments, and like the others, it was wrapped up in unhealthy patterns. Anna and BoJack were using each other for their careers and for pleasure. In many ways, it was a hollow relationship. Even the more heartwarming moments, like where Anna gives up her other clients to back BoJack, are undone when she abandons him. She learns that he didn't win an Oscar nomination and isn't there when he's at one of his biggest lows. Their relationship paints BoJack in a better light than some of the ones we've already covered. He's finding substance and learning to support a woman rather than the idea of a woman. Unfortunately, these are aimed at someone who wanted something different and had been clear about that since the beginning. There's no problem in wanting to have a sexy work fling with someone you admire professionally. There's no problem with wanting more. The issue here was just the two partners never being on the same page and never being emotionally available when it was needed.
This is the 4th time I've called. Please call me back. I need you.
Rounding out the tier, we have Gina Cazador. Hear us out. This was probably one of the most unhealthy ways to end a relationship, so you may have expected to see this in the toxic section. We're not going to say that the relationship wasn't flawed. What we will say is that before Bojack's breakdown, Gina got the best side of him. He wanted more in the relationship than she did, but that was a want that developed for him slower than it did with Anna. They were in the same place of having a casual fling when things started, and Bojack was more respectful of her boundaries as his desires for the relationship changed. When they got more serious, we see a rare, caring side of Bojack that he doesn't know how to express. Not only does he try to support and understand Gina, but he wants her to value herself. This usually backfires, but the intentions are surprisingly wholesome. Had it not been for the tragic way things ended, this might have taken the gold medal of healthy. Thanks to the pressure put on Bojack and his addiction to painkillers, however,
I'm serious, Gina. I need those pills.
he assaulted Gina during a hallucination. This had little to do with their relationship, but of course, we can't give it a pass. And finally, we have the harmful and toxic relationships, the ones that show us what Bojack can do at his worst, and how he got to be that way. Starting the tier is Penny Carson. Again, you may have expected this to be lower on the list. The show paints Bojack's night on the boat with Penny as his greatest sin, which we understand. Even though nothing actually happened, the fact that it could have illustrated one of the show's main themes. Bojack is not mature or stable enough to properly handle the influence that he has. Any good he did or might have done is undone by letting her back on his boat after knowing her intentions. The only, and we mean only, saving graces of the scene were that Penny was sober when she made the move, and Bojack did turn her away at first. Everything else about it was rightly painted as awful. Unfortunately, there is worse to come. Taking the bronze medal of Toxic is Beatrice Horseman. You know the competition must be stiff if Beatrice is only taking the bronze. This is the woman responsible for a lot of Bojack's dysfunction. It always does go back to the mother, doesn't it? We don't blame her for the neurological traits that she passes down to Bojack, but we do blame her for not preparing him or giving him any coping mechanisms to deal with the struggles she's already been facing her entire life. She makes his condition worse by putting pressure on him from an early age. At every turn, she makes him feel responsible for the things she's given up in life to have him. This toxicity may start when he's young, but it carries forward well into his adult life. Nothing he does is ever good enough, and she's unafraid to let him know it. The saddest part of Bojack's relationship to his mother is that she cares for him. When her mind starts to go when he visits her nursing home with Hollyhock, Beatrice is happy to brag about her son, not realizing he's standing right there.
Where's my orange juice, slag?
Though Bojack is able, partially, to forgive her, he will never forget the scars she left him with. Taking the silver medal of toxic relationship is her husband, Butterscotch Horseman. Bojack had less of a relationship with his father. It's to the point when he imagines Butterscotch, his traits are amalgamated with that of Secretariat, someone that Bojack admired more and in some ways knew better. The relationship he did have with Butterscotch was terrible. While Beatrice might have blamed Bojack for the terrible direction her life had gone in, she also showed affection and pushed Bojack to be something. Every interaction between Butterscotch and Bojack, Butterscotch is telling him what not to do, while also somehow encouraging his worst side. For instance, when he has to pick up Bojack from soccer practice, he goes into a monologue about why it's Bojack's fault he can't get his book done. He also suggests rather blatantly that his being forced to help raise his own son is going to turn Bojack into a crossdresser. This notion that is not only bigoted and offensive, but clearly designed to detach himself from all responsibility as a father. It's one of the only few scenes between them, and it perfectly sums up their dynamic. Finally, taking the gold medal of Toxic is Sarah Lynn. How could it not be? Bojack's relationship to Sarah Lynn combines all the paternal weirdness of his relationship to Penny with the unhealthy passing down of pressures he learned from his mother. He actually paraphrases his mother's speech about the Lollipop song when trying to give advice to Sarah Lynn when she's a child nervous about working on a show. He watches her grow up into a woman and still has sex with her when she's an adult. Unlike with Penny, these are urges that are fully acted upon. He also enables and often encourages Sarah Lynn's bad behavior. Though there are times he questions her actions and asks her to seek help, he struggles to see her doing better than him. We can never forget that Sarah Lynn was clean and sober before the weeks-long bender Bojack takes with her that leads to her death. This was toxic from both sides, but it also depicts Bojack at his absolute worst. Alright, that's enough toxicity for one day, folks. Who do you think Bojack had the worst relationship with over the course of the series? And what about the best? Let us know in the comments, as well as what other videos you'd like to see. While you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and as always, stay wicked.